Hi, everyone. Welcome to our AMA focused on AAPI Heritage Month with the always amazing and wonderful CEO and Executive Director of Impact Hub Houston, Grace Rodriguez. I'm Nguyen. I'm a member of the marketing team for Impact Hub Houston as well as a member too. So, welcome to the conversation today. This is a really personal topic for the both of us, being of Asian descent and heritage. And so we really appreciate your tuning into our conversation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So, Anne, how do you want to start off?
Awesome. Well, I would really love to highlight the history and kind of why May, right? Why May for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month? Anybody have any clues? Wanna hop and as you're viewing this, please feel free to drop in your comments or questions, as well below, and we'll be happy to answer or address any comments too. So I actually did have to look this up, and we'll share a link to an NPR article that really gives the full details, but I looked it up because I had no idea why May either. And May was chosen because the first Japanese immigrant arrived on US soil on May 7th, 1843. And then the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, that so many Chinese immigrants worked on and died for, was completed on May 10th in 1869. Hey, my memory is working. And so that's why May was chosen because of the contributions of the Chinese immigrants and because of the first arrival of a Japanese immigrant in the United States. And so, and then of course, again, several laws or bills are passed to make it a national holiday. And as I mentioned, I found a really great article on the NPR website. So that's a link to it, but I'll drop it into the comments as well so folks can read more about the Heritage Month. All right.
And thank you for sharing that, Anne. I also was wondering why May. Um, well, I also wanted to share some history too that led up to why people wanted to make sure that there was a month that was celebrating the Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage. And I looked at that through the lens of my ethnic background. And so, for those of you who don't know, I am Filipina, ethnically Filipina American. And the Filipinos came here in a couple waves. First in the 1700s, even though since the 1500s the Philippine Islands had been a Spanish colony and Filipinos were known as Manila men, they worked as indentured servants aboard Spanish galleons. And so a lot of people don't know this, but like Michelle and I joke a lot at Impact Hub how we have a Filipina culture, that it's a little hybrid mix of Filipino and Mexican and Spanish because of this tie, this cultural connection. Many Filipinos went on to fight in the Battle of New Orleans in the American Civil War. And then the second wave of Filipino immigrants started after the Philippine Revolution in 1898, after which the U.S. annexed the Philippines and made Filipinos U.S. nationals who immigrated en masse to serve in the Navy or fill agricultural jobs. And then, so when you hear about the farmer strikes in California, a lot of the Filipino community there actually were leaders of that and helped start that. And then let's fast forward into the fourth wave in the 1960s with the passing of the Immigration and Nationality Act that ended national quotas and provided an unlimited number of visas for family reunification. So prior to that, a lot of people from Asia were not allowed to immigrate to the U.S. in in numbers, right? That where you would have a significant number of them, which is one of the reasons why the Asian American diaspora in the U.S. is much smaller. We weren't allowed to immigrate here in numbers, right? There's a cap on how many people could come here from a number of different countries, and I mean, what is it? Like about a third of the global population is in Asia. So if you imagine how many people that restricted from
Mhm.
coming here, it's significant. And so in the fourth wave in 1965, my dad came here because he was sponsored by his sister, and he came to New York. And then my mom came here as a nurse, and they actually met in New York. And I was born in Queens. My brother and I were born in Queens, and then we eventually moved to Texas because my mom missed that kind of hot, humid weather from the Philippines. But the story of Filipino immigrants is very similar to a lot of the stories of other Asian immigrants, right? Indians were brought to America as servants of the British East
Hmm.
India Company. In the 1820s, the Chinese were brought here as the gold rush and railroad labor. In the 1860s, Japanese immigrants began arriving in Hawaii to work in sugarcane fields and on the mainland as farmers and fishermen. And in the 1900s, Koreans also came here. And then in the early 1900s, Vietnamese arrived here as laborers on French ships. Punjabi and Sikh farmers and Bengali merchants began arriving from South Asia. And then after the 1970s, and the Vietnam occupation, hundreds of thousands more Vietnamese refugees came to the U.S. And I know this is part of your story too.
Yeah. And no, I'm glad that you shared that, Grace, because that kind of segues into what I would really love for us to highlight as well. When we talk about the Asian community, it's such a diverse group, even within the Asian community, right? You mentioned Japanese. We've talked about Chinese, the Filipinos, Vietnamese, South Asians, such as Indians, and those on the Indian subcontinent, Punjabi, Sikhs. Everyone falls under that umbrella of Asian, and it's such a diverse and broad group, even. And so I think that's part of the education that we need to continue to put out there and distribute for those too, because when you first say Asian, a lot of people automatically think Chinese or Japanese, right? But there are so many groups of us and such a wide diverse cultural history and traditions, and I just love it all, and I hope that that is part of the celebration of the month, is learning about all the different diverse groups within that Asian umbrella as well. And so I'm glad that you brought up the history and shared a little bit about that. And yes, my family are we are one of the families that were Vietnamese refugees in 1975. We left on the day that Saigon fell, which was April 30th. So that was just a week ago that we commemorated that day.
Wow.
And it just, there's so many other families like ours who have that same history, that same story, and we need to continue to share those stories as well. Oh, looks like we've got somebody hopping in as a. Should we uh, add Anna Fount to the stream here?
I don't see. So it's your,
Okay, I'll add.
hey,
Hi,
how are you?
Anna.
Sorry, I'm just now logging in. I don't want to interrupt what y'all were already discussing.
No, no, thank you for joining us. We opened it up, and we're glad to see others joining into the conversation. We were just sharing how the term Asian is includes such a wide, diverse group of people from all over Asia. You mean, you mentioned, Grace, that it's a third of the population of the world, right, globally, and there's still so few of us here in the United States. And that was really where we segued. And then I was sharing a little bit about my family's history of leaving Vietnam.
Yeah, and I feel like that it's similar to a lot of other ethnicities. So as you were saying that, how we're all lumped into one big group, even though, so when you think of Asian American, you might not also think about specifically Filipino, or you might immediately think of Chinese or Japanese. When you think of Hispanic or Spanish, most people think of Mexican here in the
Mhm.
US, right? Versus the incredible diaspora of 22 Latin American countries and Spain and Portugal, and like other countries that were touched by that culture. And then when you think of African American, you just, a lot of times people in the US think of Black people versus
Mhm.
the incredible diaspora of people who come from a variety of different African countries. I remember seeing where there's some people who feel like Africa is a country versus a continent, and that there are so many different people there. So I feel like, every time we have a Heritage Month, it's an opportunity to look for also points of connection with other cultures, with other communities, and that way we can continue to support each other. One of the things that I've been seeing, unfortunately, arise in, and I don't know if you saw it this week, but a report came out. Let's see, the Status Index report. And it's the study's findings are in line with other recent studies on the rise of anti-Asian hate, including one from California State University Santa Barbara Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism. And it showed a 339% increase in anti-Asian violence between 2020 and 2021. And just this week, they're also reporting that more than 20% of respondents to a recent survey from Asian American advocacy groups said that this year, people of Asian descent were at least partly responsible for COVID-19. So this kind of myth and falsehood that Asian Americans are responsible for COVID-19 has kind of led to a lot of hate crimes, a lot of hate speech, a lot of aggression and otherness and othering again of Asian Americans in the U.S. And if you just look at hashtag Stop Asian Hate on Twitter or in any social media, you'll see there are a lot of reports. There was a woman, an elderly woman who was just punched walking the street. I remember early in the pandemic, there was a story about a family in Texas where somebody stabbed them. There was a Burmese family, and somebody stabbed them and their 2-year-old and 6-year-old children because they thought that they were Chinese and blamed them for COVID. So there's still a lot of hate. And unfortunately, when you look at some of the videos, they're being perpetuated by other people of color. So this, again, this idea of foreignness and you're not from here, you're not American, is leading people to stigmatize Asian Americans for a lot of other things. So there's a need for continued advocacy. There's a need for continued support for Asian Americans who are also experiencing trauma. We haven't touched on this yet, but this idea of the model minority and that Asians are doing well and so they don't need help is completely false. We experience trauma and racism and other, disadvantages just as much as many other people. In fact, a lot of the people who do come here as refugees need that additional support to get back on their feet, and just again, like a lot of other people who are struggling, especially during this time. And Anna, are you seeing, what are your communities like, and are you seeing anything similar in the networks that you're in?
Yeah, so currently right now I attend South Texas College of Law here in Houston, and I know that we're ranked one of the most diverse schools in the nation as far as law schools. And also one of the statistics shows that it's 9% Asians in our school, but I'm lucky to have even seen 9 students that I would have identified as Asian. But just like you said earlier on, that it covers a wide range, like you said, it accounts for 1/3 of our population here. And also I do see that there is a lack of, Asian representation just in general. I think what you said earlier, Grace, is just that I think culturally or historically, we've just been really resilient and reserved. And so sometimes our silence is mistaken as we are doing fine, which we're not, but we have not ever had a choice. The generations before us, I'm first generation here, and my grandparents were immigrants here. They didn't feel like they had a choice. So speaking up about it, especially being foreigners, they didn't really feel like they had a place to even speak. They had to really adjust and hopefully get people to embrace them. And I feel like that now too. I feel like there's certain disadvantages that I face for myself because this is my second career that I'm forging, and I already don't hit all of the check boxes or what's standard in law school. I'm 40, and a lot of the students that I go to school with, they're under 30, and then again with the Asian representation, and it's like, there's just not enough voice out there. We need definitely more advocacy and more support, and we need platforms to be able to amplify our voices. And, that's why I just saw this actually this morning. So I signed in right now because I'm actually going the incoming president for our Asian Pacific American Law School Student Association.
Awesome. Congrats.
Congratulations.
And this past year, I was vice president of the Women's Law Society. And then so this coming year, I'll be both president of Women's Law Society and the Asian Law Society. So I'm excited about that and really using, whatever voice I have in my own school and connections and networking that I have within the community so that we can continue to bring all this awareness and this need to kind of even out. And that really at the end of the day, we're all part of the human race. So we breathe the same air.
Yeah, exactly. We breathe the same air. Our blood is red like everyone else's too. And you brought up a good point, Anna, that, we talk about these check boxes for the successful Asian, right? Like we should be all attorneys or doctors. And I joke about how my mom wanted me to be a doctor all the time. But, to think that there are those who are not considered successful, and I don't want to say that they're not, but they're not in those professions, and then they're less than, and it's something that I've battled with for a lot of my life too, because I was never interested in science or math. I loved arts and culture and language, and that's so not part of that, model minority stereotype. But also, you talked about how our voices have been silenced, and because I've always often said that the model minority stereotype has both protected us and has been that wedge between Asians and other minority groups, right? Because it's protected us in the sense that, oh, they're as close to white or Caucasian as possible, but at the same time has driven this wedge because then other minority groups feel like we don't have the same racial struggles, which is so not true. And so I'm glad that you brought those points up. And Simi has joined us. I'm going to add him to the stream.
Yeah. So along the lines of what you were saying, Anne, with the divide, right? And I was on the board of OCA Greater Houston, which if anybody on watching has not heard of it, please look it up. OCA Greater Houston. It's a Pan-Asian American advocacy group, and so they do work for equal rights, it's similar to the NAACP or LULAC for other communities of color. But we always talked about this the divide and conquer strategy, right? So how people try to divide a lot of communities of color so we don't come together, because if we did come together, we would be incredibly powerful. And so there are people who actively try to sow those seeds of doubt and pit us against each other in terms of, who has what and why can't you be more like them, or why we need to stay away from other people like them. You're one of us. It's the idea of proximity to whiteness. The closer we are to looking at the successful American stereotype, the more we should side with whatever that group, however that group wants to oppress other communities. It's also very interesting of how the outside, like other people who are not within the Asian American community or who are outside of communities of color, think of what real oppression is. And so Anne and I were talking about this before we kicked off the conversation. How I was at this panel at South by Southwest, and we had breakout groups, and the talk was about supporting sisters of color. And in my breakout group, I talked about how some of the first Filipinos in the U.S. were slaves, and how a lot of Asian Americans were also enslaved. And this one person said, really, like in chains though, as if they weren't in chains, then they weren't real slaves. And I was so stunned, I had nothing to say back. I was just like, seriously? Because it made me think about, so even if you're thinking of Black people enslaved in chains, what about the Black people who were enslaved that worked in the homes that weren't in chains? And what about all of the other people who were raped or brutalized, or there are so many other ways of enslaving people, human trafficking, right? There's so many other ways of enslaving people that unless you have chains on your hands and feet, you are not considered a slave to some people, I guess, who are on the outside looking in. And that just drives this huge wedge again, that like it sets up this oppression Olympics where if I see your community as not having suffered in the same way that this community have, it is not worthy of support or advocacy in the same way this other community had. And it pits those communities against each other, where it's like, well, what about us all the time? And I think, well, I know for sure at Impact how we definitely want to make sure that everybody's struggles are honored, everybody's oppression is acknowledged, and that we all are working towards solutions together, right? We want to be part of the solution. So I think one of the reasons for celebration of everything that's happened in the past couple of years, as much trauma and damage it has inflicted in a lot of different communities in a lot of different ways, that I'm seeing more young people come together and saying that we need to, this idea of intersectionality needs to really take hold and be the approach that we have moving forward if we're going to all move forward together as a community. And for those who don't think that Asians don't suffer in the same way, I'm going to share a link with Anne, and hopefully she can drop that into the comments, that there have been Asian hate crimes since Asians have been in the States. And I highly recommend doing some Google searches on the history of anti-Asian hate. But Simi, welcome to the conversation.
Good to be here. Thanks for including me, everyone.
Do you identify as Asian?
Um, that's an interesting question, and I was actually pondering it when you sent the invite earlier. Um, I it depends on the group of individuals I'm with, right? So if I'm in a group of all white people, then if they talk about Asians, generally speaking, then maybe I would relate more so to that group of people. But if I were in a group of mixed people, including East Asian people of East Asian descent, then I would not consider myself part of Asian if they just said it casually.
That's really interesting, Simi. That because for me too, it took a long time to really think of South Asians, those in the Indian subcontinent, as part of the Asian community, and but it was like, duh, when it hit me, it was like, of course, that makes sense that group would be considered Asian. So, thank you for your sharing that.
Sure.
Me too. I earlier before you joined in, I had expressed to Grace and on that it's the same way in my college where same like when I said it was 9% Asians. And again, it took me a while too to think, well, I was identifying it too in more like the Eastern Asian aspect of it and not South Asian and Indians. And then same thing, I have like some others that I say, well, yeah, it depends in the same way that you've just expressed it. Like depends environment I'm in, then I am Asian, then I'm not. It kind of, So then we have like different multicultural groups within our school too. Like we have a Muslim group, we have an Indian group. And I really wish that it was all together, right? Because then just like you said, Grace, what's scary is that there is this divide and we don't realize how really powerful we would be if we were brought together and shared the same values. And whether or not you were literally in chains, we're all a prisoner in some way, shape, or form because of our cultural or because of different biases. But just because someone's gone through more doesn't mean our needs or voices are less important.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not all or nothing. And I love what you said, that if we all came together, Asians and any other minority groups, we would be a powerful force and voice for the racial struggles that we all face.
Yeah, allyship is really important. And I think it just starts with showing up, So when we first started, prior to Impact Hub, when I was with Station Houston and like still doing other events in the community, whenever we did something that was about diversity and inclusion, for instance, only women and people of color would show up. And that's not completely diverse, right? We need white men in the room as well, especially as allies. And so that idea of that, even if something doesn't say that it is for you, show up. Sometimes people seeing you there helps them welcome you in, helps them understand that you actually want to support them, that you care about them. Your presence matters, and we need more representation of people from all different communities. So one of the things that I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do more this year, now that we're kind of getting back into in-person events, is holding more social events just for people to get to meet each other. We do have our community calendar on the Houston Impact Hub website. Thanks for sharing that, Anne. You're reading my mind. But showing up at other people's, other organizations' events is really important for us, to make sure that our communities are connected and looking for those opportunities to connect with each other and support each other in a lot of the work that we do. We can share a few different resources as well in the chat. There's Asia Society has a lot of different events happening this month. Asian Chamber of Commerce. I'm really excited about this. The Asian Chamber of Commerce is sponsoring Asian Restaurant Month. And so they have a passport. If you check in at different restaurants, you can get like cool swag, a backpack, a t-shirt, and stuff like that, you get delicious food and then support local businesses, but then also get like swag to support, to show off. And we also have one of our members, Trisha Morales, is working on a movement to bring Asian American studies into the schools. So we talked earlier about how a lot of people don't know about the different histories and the different diasporas of Asian America. So it would be great for people to learn more about this movement and be supportive of Houston Reimagining Education. It's HoustonReimaginingEducation.com to get Asian American studies or Asian history studies into schools, grade schools.
Can you repeat
and then
that?
Hopefully, go ahead.
Can you repeat that again?
Sorry, say that again.
The site that you just mentioned.
I'll drop it into the link, into the comments to Anna.
Yeah, it's HoustonReimaginingeducation.com. And one of our previous members, Christy Poisot, she wrote a book called Filipinos in Houston. So she's actually part of the Philippine American National History Association. And if you're interested in learning more about the Filipinos in Houston, I highly recommend looking up that book and picking it up. But I mean, it's talking about identifying, as South Asians identifying as Asian American too. It was so interesting when Kamala Harris became the first female, Black, and Asian vice president of the U.S. A lot of people didn't celebrate the Asian American part, even though she identifies as half Indian, and I felt like it's a missed opportunity, right? So there's, first of all, I'm not even going to go into the the polarization of politics in the country, but if we could at least come together and support that history was made, we have the first female vice president, we have the first Black vice president, we have the first Asian American vice president. I mean, all of that together is monumental. Even if you don't agree with her politics, at least acknowledging that that she's had to come through a lot of different things to get to that role, right? And yet she does it with like style and grace, in my opinion, and handles a lot of the vitriol that's hurtled against her, in response to that is important. But I think if there's any one thing I could advocate for is for more Asian Americans to get into policy and advocacy, for more Asian Americans to run for office. We don't have really good representation of Asian Americans in elected positions. And oftentimes, the people who are in those roles identify as a very specific type of Asian American versus representing the diaspora broadly. So I remember, way back in the early aughts, I worked for Gordon Kwan when he was at City Council. He was Asian American council member and mayor pro tem. And then MJ Khan became the first South Asian council member. But, there haven't been that many people who run for office in the first place and then, who get elected to office to represent all of the different voices. So the more that we can support people to go into those roles, it would be great. So Anna, it sounds like you might be
Heading down that pathway.
And even if it's not being a trailblazer or even be like, carving the way and continuing to clear the path and create that platform, I'm all about it.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Sydney, I know this is something you're passionate about too, with the policy and political side of things.
Yeah, I am very interested in politics and trying to engage positively. You mentioned briefly polarization, trying to make a dent in polarization. I would love to be a small part of that solution. Would I be on the ballot anytime soon? I vote no for myself. But I would love.
You have a podcast though, so you can be a platform for people to.
100%. I would love to be a part of that.
What is the podcast again, so we can share it with people?
Sure. The name of the podcast is The March for Unity, Civility, and Political Engagement.
Oh, awesome. So do you have the link handy, or I'll do
Sure, no worries.
Yeah, drop it into yes, if you don't mind, and I'll make sure that we share it for you. And that. I'm so glad that you guys talked about leadership, and because the theme, the official theme for this year's AAPI Heritage Month, according to the Federal Asian Pacific American Council, is advancing leaders through collaboration. So how can we have more Asian leaders in different sectors and have an Asian in any, shape, form, or diversity group, a diverse group that we have under that umbrella, to really collaborate so that we can continue to advocate and we can continue to celebrate our communities, and so that we can continue to make a difference.
Yeah. And even if we don't get more, well, I'm hoping we get more. So in addition to getting more people into elected seats or into government, period, right? You can be appointed, you can work for the government as an employee. is also helping more people understand the issues, in our positions and the stories from the Asian American community. So let's say for all of the African Americans and Hispanic Americans that are elected to different offices, if they know our stories, they can also represent our voices too. So that, again, going back to that intersectionality and allyship, I think is really critical. Is there anything else? I know we're at the top of the hour. Is there something that you hope that, like a point that you would like to leave with people as they go into their weekend?
For me, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like we've mentioned this model minority stereotype, and I think you mentioned a TED WED talk that we've got coming up, I think too, on May 25th.
Yeah.
That when can a stereotype be good? And I feel like, as I mentioned before, it's both protected us and put this wedge, but also, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but I've always, kind of jokingly, I've had people say, "Oh, but aren't you, the good Asian who doesn't speak up?" And if you know me personally, I'm kind of vocal. I don't really fall into that stereotype. I'm very direct, and I'm not that silent, Asian. But lately, I feel like it has hurt me because I've always been the kind who will speak up when I see something that's wrong, right, or an injustice, and now all of a sudden, because I look like this, I don't get to voice those things, and so that's something that I wanted to bring up, and not that we have an answer for it now, but it's just part of a conversation that we should continue to have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It extends beyond the month. Anna, Simi, do you have anything to add before I chime in?
No, I just would love to continue to have more opportunities like this where we can continue to just really speak openly and uninhibited and not feel like that there isn't some type of connection, and that we really could really open opportunities for each other. It doesn't not necessarily be us on the ballot, right, Simi? It doesn't have to be. It's about creating opportunities and really making our presence known.
Yeah.
For sure. One, I want to say thank you for having this space and continuing these important conversations. Two, I've recently come out of a racial justice seminar that I've attended through Houston in Action. So I have a slew of emotions around some of the issues that we've talked about. But I want to just summarize by tacking on to something I think Grace said earlier. Don't underestimate the power of you being present and learning more about issues and just listening to others. And I think sometimes we feel that we have to add something to a conversation in order to join it. But honestly, just starting a conversation and listening might be the right first step for you. So thank you again for inviting me here.
Thank you for showing up, Simi. Again, representation and presence is incredibly important. And, I'm hoping that we'll continue to have events in the future that help present opportunities for connection and that intersectionality. So please stay posted to the calendar that Anne shared earlier. It's houston.impacthub.net/calendar. And then you'll get a notification for when we do have that TED WED. So what Anne was mentioning, we are the TEDx Houston also licensees and organizers for our region, but we are planning on reviving what was TED Circles in the past couple of years and now is evolving into just TED Conversations, where the talk is, we focus on the talk and then provide breakout sessions and discussion for people to answer questions or connect with each other, share ideas about some issues and topics that are touched on in that talk. And so the first one is going to be May 25th. We haven't published the LinkedIn yet, but you'll get a notice to it if you follow Impact Hub on any of the social media or subscribe to our newsletter. But it's going to focus on, can stereotypes be good? And Anne had mentioned the model minority myth, but other stereotypes. Are there times when they're good? Are they always bad? Or when do we think that they're good, but they're actually not, benefiting us in any kind of way? But ultimately, I think it's more about, it's coming back to the human connection of it, and as Anna said earlier, we're all human, and Anna and Anne talked about, we all breathe the same air and we bleed red. I think that giving space providing space for people to show up authentically and bring their whole selves and all of the different aspects of that would help dispel a lot of those stereotypes. So we invite you to participate in everything that we're doing and everything that our community partners are doing. And you can find a lot of those community partners on our website. Again, the logos, links to all of them. And I think those are the things that we wanted to make sure that everybody got involved in. Again, support Asian restaurants. The Asian Chamber of Commerce has that passport. Support Tricia and the Asian American Studies in Schools with HoustonReimaginingEducation.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out on our social media because we are happy to answer. And Anne is always there. Thank you, Anne, for being our community liaison for Impact Hub Houston for the past year and a half or so.
Oh, thanks for giving me the opportunity. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, sorry. And I dropped that one link there. I don't know if you saw it, Anne.
Yes, for
if you can
Holla
share it.
Back.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And these are trainings to support Asian Americans. So if you wanted to share that resource with anybody, or if you would like to participate in it yourself, there are bystander intervention trainings so that when you see something happen, you have a safe way, a guided way of supporting.
Yep, and then also stay tuned to our Impact Hub Houston social channels because I'll be sharing, continuing to share the local community events as well that OCA and Texas Asia Society are hosting. Specifically, I wanted to point out there's an immigration forum that's being held on several dates, and that is through OCA Greater Houston as well. And so you'll be able to find that information on their Facebook page, and I'll make sure that all the links are in the comments below.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
And I'm so glad that Anna and Simi hopped on and joined this conversation. I was thinking about you this morning, Simi, going, oh, I wonder if he got that invitation.
I did. I'm sorry I was late. It was really good what I caught, though.
Yeah, no worries about the timing. We were happy to have you here and have you present.
It was good to be here. Y'all enjoy your Friday.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, you
have a
too.
great weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.